One of the greatest archaeological findings of the 20th century happened in 1986 when archaeologists in Sanxingdui, Sichuan, China, unearthed a treasure trove of unfamiliar artifacts from an almost 5,000-year-old culture that few have heard of, in the heart of modern China, no less. As of today, over 13,000 artifacts were already recovered from 8 excavated pits. Too many to show here, so I have picked a few most iconic ones, like this 2.6 meter tall bronze statue of a man supposedly holding a yet to be identified item, or this bronze mask uncovered from pit number 3, seen here with the restorer for scale, or this highly emotive bronze figure with exaggerated heads and palms excavated in 2021, or this pottery swine figurine excavated in 2020 that bears more than a passing resemblance with the pig from Angry Bird. The findings captivated the world of archaeology and history, not only due to the exotic and unfamiliarity of the artistic style of this culture, despite being adjacent to the heartland of the Chinese civilization, but more importantly, carbon dating suggests that this culture lived alongside the Chinese throughout the first half of the Chinese civilization, declining during the spring and autumn period, eventually succumbing to Qin in 316 BC. Perhaps more surprisingly is that despite the almost autistic level with which the Chinese records their history beginning from roughly 3,500 years ago, we barely have a handful of reference to these people in written records. Shrouded by mystery, the origins of this civilization gave rise to various conspiracy theories, ranging from an Egyptian or Mesopotamian origin to this:
human beings of today.
no, it's never aliens, okay? Today, historians agree generally that the later part of Sanxingdui culture evolved into the ancient state of Shu that existed roughly between 1000 BC to 316 BC when it was absorbed by Qin. While the oracle bone inscription from the Shang period may have referred to this culture, the first clear reference to this culture existed only as one single word in the Shu Jing circled here, in a speech by King Wu of Zhou right before the Battle of Muye of 1046 BC, where he addressed the kingdoms from the west that sent troops to support his campaign against the Shang dynasty. This battle marks the end of the Shang, with King Wu of Zhou establishing the Zhou dynasty that would rule for the next 800 years. Despite its isolation and exotic presentation in its arts, modern scholarship are now piecing together a puzzle that seems to suggest that early Sanxingdui culture may be intricately linked to Neolithic societies that gave rise to the Chinese civilization. Pottery and cultural research have determined that Sanxingdui culture is an evolution of the earlier Baotun culture, who were themselves culturally descended after a few migratory steps from the Ma Jiayao culture. And the famous Ma Jiayao culture is a branch from the Middle Yangshao culture, generally agreed to be the genetic birthplace of Han Chinese and the Urheimat of the Sino-Tibetan language family. This is subsequently supported by genetic testing from Baotun side, which matched the population of the Yellow River millet farmers, a broad scientific term including the people of Yangshao culture, meaning that the people of Sanxingdui is most likely genetically and linguistically descended from the same parents as the modern Han Chinese. While recent scholarships have shown that Han Chinese have a monophyletic origin in genetics and linguistics, the same cannot be said about the Chinese culture, as multiple Neolithic groups spread across modern China contributed culturally to what we term the Chinese civilization. An example of this polyphyletic origin of the Chinese culture is seen in this 3D printed reconstruction of a bronze altar excavated from Sanxingdui, pit number 8 in 2022. At the bottom of this assembly is a square base with figurines of different sizes, 4 of which lifting a huge beast. Above the beast sits a man lifting another square base supporting 4 pillars with rounded top. While this altar and its assembly of statues and symbols barely has any discernible Chinese motifs, but on a deeper examination, 3 aspects are identifiable as Chinese cultural elements. The first Chinese element is the dragons on the pillars holding onto the horns of the buffaloes. While modern Chinese dragon sports thick bodies with elaborate scales, spikes, and horns, the earliest portrayal of dragon is very different. Archaeologists trace the evolution of the dragon to Hongshan culture, a Neolithic culture 2,000 over kilometers away in northeast China that existed approximately 1,500 years to 500 years before Sanxingdui began. These early dragons have pig's head and snake's body, affectionately known as the pig dragon, with early pig dragons being stubby and short, while later ones have long, gracile, snake-like bodies. As to why the Hongshan culture worshipped pigs and snakes, that has something to do with the polar star and the passing of the 4 season, but that is a story for another time. Coming back to the bronze altar, the dragons portrayed here, while gracile, already spots most of the features of modern Chinese dragons, suggesting a borrowing from the Central Plains culture that had more crocodilian element to their dragon, which were then syncretized into this form before making into Sanxingdui. The second element staying on the topic of Hongshan culture is the early Chinese cosmology that believed that the heaven is round and the earth is square, 天圆地方. This juxtaposition of round heaven and square earth has deep influence on Chinese culture well into modern day, from ancient Chinese coinages to moon gates, to ancient buildings like the Temple of Heaven, built during the Ming Dynasty, to modern buildings like the Shanghai Museum. The oldest archaeological finding attestable to this concept is in the Goddess Temple at New Heliang, archaeological site of Hongshan culture, which dates to 3500 BC. 2,000 years later, in 1500 BC, and 2,200 kilometers away, the people of Sanxingdui would cast a bronze altar featuring dragons descending from a round heaven, grabbing the horns of a buffalo on earth, perched on a square platform, informing us of the influence that came before them from as far away in space and in time as Hongshan culture. The third Chinese element concerns the 4 pillars holding up the round heaven. Those informed on the Chinese mythologies would be familiar with Nuwa and her mending of the pillars of heaven. How do we know there are 4 pillars instead of 3 or 5? The Chinese idiom 断鳌立脊 comes from this legend, where Nuwa cuts off the long legs of the mystical tortoise Ao to form the pillars, conveniently explaining modern tortoises' short stubby limbs. What this tells us is that while the artistic expression of Sanxingdui's artifacts look foreign or even alien, it firmly takes its place in cultures that contributes towards the formation of the modern Chinese civilization. While much is still unknown about the origins of these people, their story didn't end with their nation. Towards the end of the spring and autumn period, King Huiwen of Qin, which is Qin Shi Huang's great-great-grandfather, would conquer the kingdom of Shu and the confederation of Ba, both being political entities descended from the Sanxingdui culture. The majority of the people of Shu and Ba became absorbed as people of Qin. The Shiji Zhengyi records that a large number of nobility of Shu left the Sichuan basin and settled in Yunnan near modern-day city of Dali. Furthermore, according to Sui Jingzhu, one specific group of this nobility went further south and reached what is northern Vietnam today, conquered the Van Lang kingdom and established the kingdom of Aulak, naming himself King Anyang. Unfortunately, the last chapter for the nobility of these ancient people, going back to the beginning of Chinese history, would end here. Unable to escape the grasp of Qin, King Anyang was eventually defeated by Zhao Tuo, a general of Qin who had the command of 500,000 soldiers guarding the southern frontier. When Qin surrendered to Han in 207 BC, Zhao Tuo with his Qin soldiers, instead of returning to China, founded the Nanyue kingdoms, or Nam Viet, with the rest being Vietnamese history.